Hey there, come a little closer to the fire and let the room dim around us. Tonight I want to tell you a darker truth, one that has been sleeping under dust for a very long time. It is about clay tablets sealed in museum basements, about impossible rains written as if time itself could be stretched, about a flood layer that sits like a quiet scar between worlds, and about a story of creation that begins not with love, but with labor. If you enjoy drifting through mysteries like this, please tap like and subscribe. It helps other late-night wanderers find a calm place to rest. And if you feel like sharing, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. I always like picturing the scattered lights of people awake together. Now, let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw soften. Let the muscles around your eyes relax. Breathe in slowly through your nose and breathe out gently, as if you are fogging a cold window. One more slow breath in and one more slow breath out. Good. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the smallest sounds first. The faint tick of settling wood in the fireplace. The soft whisper of candle smoke rising. The fabric of your sleeve brushing your wrist as you shift. Just once. To get comfortable. I have always found it strange how the most unsettling stories become easier to hold when the room is quiet and the light is low and there is warmth nearby. So we will keep it that way. Warm, quiet, safe. Now, imagine a building that does not sleep. A museum. After hours, when the doors are locked and the city noise thins. Above, the public galleries are still, with their plaques and glass cases and carefully angled lights. But below, beneath the polished floors, there are storage rooms where the air is cooler and the smell changes. Dust, old cardboard, dry wood, the faint mineral scent of stone. In those rooms, shelves run like narrow streets, and on the shelves sit boxes and trays and drawers. Inside them are objects that once lived in hands. A clay tablet is not a dramatic thing, not at first glance. It can be small, palm-sized, heavy for its size, with edges worn smooth. Its surface looks like it has been pressed with tiny bird tracks, wedges, angles, marks that catch the light and then disappear again when you tilt it. For thousands of years, those marks have waited, not for a king, not for a priest, not even for a scholar. They waited for the moment when a mind would arrive that could read without tiring. For more than a century, many of these tablets were excavated, catalogued, and then set aside. Not because they were unimportant, but because there were too many. Hundreds of thousands, by some estimates, scattered across museums in many countries. And only a small number of living people could truly read the old scripts well enough to translate them with care. You know that feeling when you have a room full of locked doors, and only one key, and the key is held by someone who cannot possibly open them all. That is what Cuneiform has been like. A whole civilization speaking softly through clay, and modern humanity turning its head, unable to understand. Then, very recently, the situation began to change. Not with a new excavation, not with a new emperor funding scholarship, but with machines. Quiet machines. Tireless machines. systems that learn patterns the way a river learns a channel. Researchers began training neural networks on large collections of already translated texts. They fed the machines sign after sign, line after line, grammar after grammar. And the machines began to answer back. Not with certainty, not with perfection, but with speed. A photograph goes in. An English draft comes out. Seconds. Not months. Not years. Honestly, that is the part that makes my skin prickle. Even when I try to stay calm. Because the tablets are not only letters, they are voices. And when you let tens of thousands of voices speak at once, you do not only get neat inventories of grain and sheep, you get stories. Creation stories. Flood stories. Arguments between gods. Lists of kings that hold numbers so large they feel like dreams. And sometimes, in the middle of a text that looks ordinary, there is a sentence that turns the light slightly colder. Tonight we will walk slowly through that. We will not rush. We will not demand a final verdict. Some scholars argue that these are myths, theology, poetry, the human mind building meaning out of sky and river and fear. Others see politics in the clay, a way to justify who must work and who gets to rest. And there are people who read the same words and hear something else, a distorted memory of real events, or a record of strangers so powerful they were called gods. It is debated. We cannot be sure, but we can listen, and listening is enough for a night like this. So picture the first tablet we choose to lift from its tray. A small thing, baked hard by an ancient fire. The edges are chipped. There is dust settled in the grooves of the wedges. Someone brushes it away gently, and the dust lifts in a thin haze, then falls again like quiet snow. A camera captures the surface under angled light. A computer holds the image, studying it, counting wedges, grouping signs, building words. And then, line by line, a voice returns from deep time. When on high, before the sky had a name, before the earth was called anything at all, before human hands were asked to keep a world running. Let that settle in your chest, like a warm stone. The oldest writing we know, waking up, not in a temple, but on a screen. Not in a priestly chant, but in simple English. And in those first lines, you can already feel the shape of what is coming. Water in darkness, silence disturbed, a council, a rebellion, a body broken to make order. And then, the strangest twist, the making of humans, not as children of wonder, but as tools of relief. Stay with me by the fire. We will move closer, slowly, from the museum hush into the older hush beneath the world, the place the tablets call the deep waters. We will listen for the moment when the story of creation stops being beautiful and becomes useful. And we will do it gently. As the night continues to soften around you, if you listen closely, you can feel how time behaves in those storage rooms. It slows down. A hand reaches for a drawer handle, pose, and then pulls. Metal slides on metal, a quiet scrape, then a soft stop. A tray emerges. more dust. A label in careful handwriting. A number that means nothing by itself, until the tablet beneath it begins to speak. I want you to imagine the path those tablets took. A city of mud, brick, and reed mats, then a collapse, then centuries of sand, then shovels, then crates, then ships, then a museum, a basement, a shelf, the same journey, repeated again and again, until the shelves begin to look endless. It is easy to forget that each piece of clay was once warm and wet in a scribe hand. It is easy to forget the reed stylus, cut at an angle, pressed into the surface with steady rhythm. Press, lift, press, lift. A whole language made of pressure and release. A whole library made of patient fingertips. In the scribal schools, the students practiced on throwaway tablets. You can still see their mistakes. A sign started too far to the left. A line that drifts. A wedge that is too deep and smudges the clay. Then a fresh start. There is something tender in that. A child or a young apprentice trying to hold an empire of knowledge in one small hand, trying to make the future readable, not knowing the future would be machines, and camera lenses, and computer screens glowing in the dark. Now the machines arrive. I picture them as quiet lamps on a workbench. No drama, no thunder, just a hum from a fan, a small click from a hard drive, and then the steady work of pattern. A researcher takes a photograph, adjusts the light, and watches the surface change. A wedge that was hidden becomes clear. A sign that looked like a scratch becomes a word. Then the software begins. It does not understand the story the way a human understands. It does not feel awe. It does not fear the gods in the text. It simply maps. This sign follows that sign. This word appears in that context. This grammar tends to end a sentence. And gradually, it becomes a bridge. One group of researchers in Israel trained a network on tens of thousands of texts that were already translated. A large open corpus that scholars had built over many years. They taught it to read Akkadian, one of the main languages of Mesopotamia, alongside Sumerian. The system works like a translator you might use for modern languages, but aimed at words that have not been spoken aloud for 2,000 years. It can take an image of wedges pressed into clay and produce an English draft quickly. It is better with routine lists. It is weaker with poetry. It can stumble. Sometimes it fills a gap with a guess that sounds smooth but is wrong. That is part of the unease. A machine can be confident and mistaken at the same time. So the human scholars remain. They check the work. They correct. They argue. They compare one tablet to another and ask what this word really means in this city, in this century, in this ritual. Still, even a rough translation is a lantern. Think of how many tablets exist, perhaps 500,000 in collections across the world. Think of how few have been read by people with living eyes. A bottleneck made of time and training. Then imagine the bottleneck loosening. Not disappearing, but loosening. Suddenly, a scholar can scan 100 tablets, skim the drafts, and find the one line that matters. the one unusual phrase, the one reference that echoes something older. Instead of searching blind, they search with a map. And this is where the dark feeling creeps in. Because some doors were closed for a reason, at least in the old world. The tablets themselves say this, in their own careful way. There are hints that the full story of human making was not for everyone. There were temple archives, and priestly knowledge, and a hierarchy of who was allowed to read what. Ordinary people heard simplified versions. Scribes and priests read the fuller ones. The creation was a secret, not because it was sacred in a gentle way, but because it was useful in a harsh way. You serve, because you were made to serve. Your place is fixed, because the clay says it is. If the workers knew too much, the order might shake. So when we translate these texts now, we are not only reading myths, we are touching old power, old control, old explanations for why some people carried burdens and others held titles. And we are doing it in a world where our own machines are beginning to look a little like the gods in those stories. We build intelligence. We ask it to work. We ask it to read. And it reads. Sometimes I imagine the basement again, but in the future, a different kind of archive. Not clay, but servers. Not wedges, but code. And perhaps, one day, something we build will look back at our records and read them the way we read these tablets. Quietly, patiently, without sleep. It is a strange mirror, and it makes the candle flame seem smaller. But do not worry. For now, we are still here. Still human. Still breathing. Still warm. The story can be held without tightening your chest. It can be held the way you hold a cup of warm tea, with both hands, steady and gentle. So we return to the tablet, the first lines, the old opening that has floated through the centuries. When on high, before names, before order, there were waters. Fresh water below, salt water above. They mingled in darkness, and from that mingling, beings emerged. The text gives them names, and those names are like stones in the mouth, ancient and heavy. Apsu, Tiamat, then younger ones, restless, noisy, alive. Their noise is a kind of betrayal. Not intended, perhaps, but real. The elders want silence. The young bring motion. And motion always disturbs what came before. This is the rhythm the tablets return to again and again. Work, rebellion, punishment, creation, control. A cycle like water moving through canals. A cycle like breath moving through you. In, out, in, out. In the next part of our walk, we will step fully into the great creation epic that survived as 7 tablets. We will watch a champion rise, and we will watch a body become a map of the world. We will reach the moment when the gods look at their own labor and decide they want to rest. And we will hear the quiet sentence that explains why humans were made. To carry the burden, to hold up the day, so the ones above could sleep. Stay near the fire a little longer. Let the warmth keep your hands loose. Let the words arrive like soft footsteps on stone. We are almost at the point where the clay turns the story toward us and asks us to imagine our own beginning. The next tablet feels heavier, not because the clay weighs more, but because the story inside it carries weight. If you were here, you would notice how your fingers automatically adjust, how you cradle the edges, how you avoid brushing the surface too hard, as if the wedges might bruise. This is one of the famous texts. The Babylonian creation, epic, often called Enuma Elish. 7 tablets, lines arranged with care, as if the scribe wanted the rhythm to be remembered even when the voice was gone. Scholars have studied these lines for generations, and still, they argue about them. Now the machines join the conversation, offering draft after draft, widening the circle of people who can read, and that widening is both beautiful and unsettling. The epic opens before names, before sky, before earth, only water, sweet water in the deep, salt water in the sea, Apsu and Tiamat, mingling in darkness. It is easy to picture it as calm, but the text does not feel calm. It feels crowded, potential pressing against itself, something trying to be born. From the mingling, younger gods appear. Names stack like bricks. Lahmu and Lahamu. Then Anshar and Kishar. Then Anu, the sky. Then Ea, also called Enki, the one linked to deep waters and to cleverness. The family tree grows, and with it, the noise begins. I want you to hold on to that one word, noise, not as a harsh sound, but as life in motion. Children running in a courtyard, voices in a market, hammers on wood, the stir of minds. The text repeats the complaint. 3 elders cannot sleep. Apsu, ancient, weary, decides the younger ones must be silenced. It is not framed as a gentle correction. It is framed as an ending. Here is where the story becomes a kind of soft horror. Not with gore, not with screaming, but with calm decisions made at a distance. A council, a plan. Apsu will destroy the younger gods. And then, betrayal arrives, wrapped in wisdom. Ea learns the plan. He uses a spell, a kind of lullaby that becomes a weapon. Apsu falls into deep sleep. And then, Apsu is killed. The deep waters, the first father, becomes a corpse. Ea builds a dwelling on that corpse, a house on the dead body of the one he defeated. That image lingers, even if you do not push it too hard. A home built on a silenced elder, order built on a buried beginning. In that new dwelling, something brilliant is born. Marduk. The text describes him with radiance, with power, with a kind of bright pressure that makes other gods step back. 4 eyes, 4 ears in some translations, symbols of perception and reach. He is the answer to a problem not yet fully spoken. Because Tiamat, the salt water mother, hears what happened. She feels the absence of Apsu. She becomes furious. And in her fury, she does what the sea does when it turns. She rises. She gathers monsters, storm demons, serpents, beasts with venom. The details vary by translation, and some scholars argue about which creature is which. But the mood is clear. Chaos is mobilizing. Tiamat chooses a champion of her own. Kingu. He is elevated. He is given something precious, the tablet of destinies, a symbol of law itself. To hold it is to hold the rules. To hold it is to say, the world will be written my way. The younger gods panic. They look for someone to face the Sea Mother. Many hesitate. Many refuse. Then Marduk steps forward. But he does not step forward for free. This is another cold moment. He demands a bargain. If he wins, he will be supreme. He will rule the council. The gods agree, because fear makes agreements fast. The battle is described as cosmic, but you can picture it in quiet images. A net cast wide. A wind driven into an open mouth. A body swelling, trapped. An arrow that ends a heartbeat. Then the act that becomes the foundation of the world. Marduk splits Tiamat in two. One half becomes the dome of heaven. The other becomes the earth. The stars are set in their places. The calendar begins. Order is established. And beneath it all, the feeling remains. A world built out of a body. Honestly, that is the part I sit with most often. Not because it is bloody, but because it is intimate. The cosmos as something made from something killed. Creation as an act of rearranging the dead. If you let yourself think about it gently, it feels like an echo of how all life works. Leaves fall. Soil forms. New growth rises. Nothing is made from nothing. Everything is made from what came before. Still, the epic is not finished. Because even after the world is built, there is a problem that sounds almost ordinary. Work. The gods have tasks. Digging canals. Maintaining the rivers. Keeping the world running. And they are tired. The text makes them sound like workers, not like distant perfection. They want relief. They want someone else to carry the burden. This is where the story turns toward us. Marduk declares he will create humanity, not from clay alone, but from the blood of a god. That sentence is like a thin blade, not sharp with violence, but sharp with implication. A god will be cut. A god will be used. And the clay of earth will be mixed with that blood. The result will be a being designed to work. The council asks, who caused the rebellion? Who stirred Tiamat? Who deserves punishment? They point to Kingu. He is bound. The tablet of destinies is taken. And then, in the calm language of ritual, Kingu is killed. His blood is collected. Clay is prepared. Hands mix the two, and the first human is shaped. The text is explicit about purpose. Humans will bear the labor of the gods. Humans will keep the world running, so the gods can rest. If you have ever felt exhausted, truly exhausted. You might understand why this story was told. It explains why work feels endless. It explains why the burden is part of being alive. But it also carries a darker taste. It suggests we were made for someone else, made as a solution, a labor-saving device. Some scholars read that as theology, a way to justify hierarchy. You work because the cosmos says you work. Others read it as mythic psychology, a story that admits something painful. That life demands effort, and we cope by imagining the burden was assigned. And there are those who read it more literally, who hear in the procedural language a strange resemblance to a recipe, to a method, to a deliberate manufacture. It is debated. We cannot be sure, but the words are there, and Enuma Elish is not alone. There is another story, older in some form, the Epic of Atrahasis. The framing shifts, but the spine remains. In this telling, the great gods divide the world. Anu takes the sky. Enlil takes the earth. Ea takes the waters. Then the lesser gods, called the Yagichi, are given the hard labor. They dig canals. They clear riverbeds. They keep irrigation alive in a dry land. They do this for a long stretch of time, described in cycles that feel both precise and symbolic. And then they rebel. The rebellion is not described as a riot with shouting. It is described with a quiet finality. They burn their tools. They surround the house of Enlil at night. They demand an end. Enlil is furious. He wants punishment. But Ea suggests another option. Create a substitute. Make a worker. Let that worker take the burden. They agree. They summon a birth goddess, named in different ways in different lines. Nintu, Mami. She is asked to do something that sounds like craft. Take clay from the deep waters. But clay alone is not enough. A god must be sacrificed. In Atrahasis, it is a god called Ila, the instigator of the rebellion. He is slaughtered. His flesh and blood are mixed into the clay. Other gods spit upon the mixture, adding essence. The language is uncomfortable, not because it is graphic, but because it is procedural, like ingredients being combined. Then the shaping begins. Figures are formed. Some texts speak of 7 and 7, male and female. They are placed in special wombs. 10 months pass. They are born, not as infants, but as ready beings, conscious, capable of labor. And there is a line in Atrahasis that repeats, a line about binding. In the clay, God and man are bound to a unity, a blood kinship, a bond that lasts to the end of days. You can let that line float through you without forcing a meaning. Just feel it. Clay, blood, binding, a unity, a kinship, a chain of descent. Traditional scholarship reads this as a mythic answer to questions. Why do we work? Because we were made to take on divine labor. Why are we mortal? Because we are clay with only a portion of divinity. Why do we think? Because the divine blood gives us spirit, the breath of mind. It is a story that explains human condition in the language of temples. But you can also see why some listeners feel the story carries another shadow. The emphasis on process, the mention of attempts and adjustments in other texts, the idea that the first versions were flawed, blind, mute, unable to reproduce, and that the makers refined the design. It can sound like experimentation, like trial and error, like someone trying to get a tool working properly. This is where people begin to whisper about technology, about beings seen as gods, because their knowledge was beyond comprehension. This is where myth brushes against the modern imagination. For tonight, we do not need to choose. We can hold both. We can say, yes, these are myths. And we can also say, myths sometimes preserve memories in strange shapes. A flood becomes a moral lesson and also a geological trace. A star becomes a symbol and also a light in the sky. A recipe becomes a ritual and also a hint of something once done with hands. So let us return, gently, to the image of clay being mixed. Not as a threat, but as a quiet origin image. A bowl, water from the deep, clay from a riverbank, a small amount of blood, hands turning the mixture until it becomes smooth. Incantation spoken, because words are part of how humans make meaning. Then the shaping, the smoothing, the patience. A face formed, a body formed, a being made to lift baskets, to dig canals, to keep the water moving. And under that, the tragedy. Because if you are made to work and you begin to think, you will eventually ask why. You will eventually look up from the canal and wonder who is resting. You will wonder who benefits from your sore hands. That question is the seed of every rebellion. And the tablets know it. They were written by people who lived in hierarchies, who watched rulers claim divine descent, who watched temples demand offerings, who watched labor fall on the many so the few could sleep. In the next part, we will follow the story beyond creation into control, the flood that wipes the slate, the quiet changes imposed afterward, shorter lives, harder births, limits that feel like a new code written into the human body. For now, let your breathing stay slow. Let the fire crackle. Let the clay cool in your mind. We have reached the first answer the tablets offer, and it is heavy, but you do not have to carry it alone. If you are starting to feel the story press on you, let it loosen. Imagine placing the tablet back into its tray. A soft tap as clay meets felt. A drawer sliding closed. The knowledge remains, but your body is still here, still safe. To read these tablets, modern teams use light that moves across the surface from different angles. A shadow that hides a wedge in one angle reveals it in another. The machine reads what it can, and when the surface is broken, it guesses. Sometimes it guesses smoothly and wrong. So human scholars lean in close, comparing passages, searching for the same phrase in a different city, on a different tablet, written by a different hand. This is why the number of translated texts matters. A few famous epics give you a story. Hundreds of thousands give you a chorus. Patterns appear. Themes repeat. And among the strongest themes is this one. The world is maintained by labor. The order of things is not automatic. Someone has to dig. Someone has to lift. Someone has to keep water in its channel. In the myths, the gods get tired of doing it, so they create us. In the real world, rulers rest while farmers sweat, and the myth makes the arrangement feel eternal. And now, with the creation told, you can sense what must follow. If humans were made to bear burdens, then humans will multiply and fill the land with sound. If sound disturbs the sleepers above, the sleepers will seek silence. In Mesopotamian stories, that silence arrives as water, a flood that resets the world, remembered in many cultures, and perhaps echoed by real layers of silt under ancient cities. We will walk into that next, slowly. For now, just rest with the beginning. Clay and blood, work and purpose. The fire is still here. Your breathing is still steady. And the next tablet is already waiting. In the basement of the museum, the air stays cool and steady. You can imagine the shelves again. Long rows of trays, each tray holding a palm-sized piece of fired clay. A lamp turns on above a workbench, a soft circle of light, and a researcher sets one tablet down as if it were a sleeping animal. The tablet does not move, but it carries the imprint of hands that moved with intention, and those hands are long gone. Now the camera comes close. It does not touch. It only looks. Light moves across the surface from one angle, then another, then another, and the wedges appear and fade, like tiny valleys catching sunrise. The image is fed into the system, and the system begins its quiet work. It finds the edges of each wedge. It groups wedges into signs. It groups signs into words. Then it tries to place the words into grammar. It does this without patience or impatience. It simply does it. Human scholars still sit nearby. They are not replaced. They become something like navigators. They watch for errors. They watch for the places where the machine invents a smooth phrase that was never pressed into clay. It happens. A missing corner leads to a guess. A rare word leads to a guess. A poetic line leads to a guess. So the scholars compare. They open other tablets from other cities. They look for the same phrase. They look for the same pattern. A chorus corrects a single voice. This is what changes when thousands of tablets become readable. The famous epics are no longer alone. The hymns and letters and school exercises begin to speak beside them. A small invoice of barley might include a line of prayer. A list of temple objects might include a name that appears in an epic. A student practice tablet might copy a passage from a story older than the student. The boundaries blur. Myth and administration sit on the same shelf. In the creation stories we already touched, the reason for humanity is blunt. Humans are made to take the burden. Humans are made so that others can rest. That is the core. But as more texts are scanned, a wider pattern emerges. The texts do not only say humans were made. They say there was a time before the present order, and that time ended in water. You can feel the shift when the tablets begin to speak about the flood. The tone changes. The lines become less like cosmic poetry and more like memory. A storm, a darkness, winds that do not stop, water rising from below and falling from above, people climbing to rooftops, animals pressed together in fear. Then silence, and after silence, mud. Archaeologists have their own kind of tablets, not clay, layers. In some ancient cities, the earth holds a band of clean silt between two layers of occupation. A floor, then silt, then another floor. The silt is not imagination. It is water that arrived fast enough to leave a mark. In places like Ur and Uruk and Kish and Shuruppak, excavators found flood deposits that changed the story of those cities. The dates vary. Some layers point to floods in the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Some layers are local. Some layers might be larger. Scholars argue about how these layers relate to the myths. Some say the myths grew from local disasters. Some say the myths preserved older memories. It is debated. We cannot be sure. Still, the flood is a hinge in the text. Before the flood, there are kings with reigns that stretch beyond belief. After the flood, the reigns shrink. The Sumerian king list is famous for this pattern. It names rulers before the flood. It gives them reigns of tens of thousands of years. Then, it states that the flood swept over. Then it lists kings again, and their reigns are shorter. Hundreds. Then decades. Then names that match other records. The list becomes history slowly, like a shoreline appearing as water pulls back. Mainstream scholars often treat the earliest reign numbers as symbolic, a way to say these rulers belonged to the divine age, a way to separate myth time from human time. That interpretation makes sense. It also leaves a faint unease, because the scribes did not present the list as a joke. They wrote it as a record. They copied it and recopied it. They treated the numbers as if they mattered. Some readers imagine other explanations. They imagine different measurements of time. They imagine cycles rather than years. They imagine that the earliest rulers were not fully human, or that they were remembered as more than human. These ideas are not proven. They sit in the shadow space between text and desire. But the text itself keeps returning to a similar image. Beings who come down. Beings who rule. Then a flood. Then withdrawal. Then a new order. As more tablets are translated, another pattern becomes clear. The great gods do not always agree. The texts describe councils. They describe argument. They describe factions. One name is linked again and again to strictness and control. Enlil. Another name is linked again and again to cunning and protection. Ea, also called Enki. In Atrahasis, Enlil wants humanity reduced. Ea suggests alternatives. In some passages, Ea appears as a friend of humans. In other passages, he appears as the one who gave forbidden knowledge. The tension is part of the story, and it repeats across cultures. You can hear an echo of it in later myths. A figure who steals fire and gives it to humans. A figure who offers knowledge and is punished. A figure who whispers truth while authority threatens. The Mesopotamian texts do not need those later echoes to stand. But the echoes show that the pattern is old. The flood story in these tablets is not only a storm, it is a decision. In Atrahasis, the gods complain about human noise. They say the sound keeps them from sleeping. They try plague. They try famine. They try drought. Each time, Ea quietly helps humans survive. At last, Enlil decides on a flood. The gods swear an oath. No one will warn humanity. Then Ea finds a way around the oath. He does not speak to a man. He speaks to a wall. He tells the wall what to do. The man overhears. A loophole becomes salvation. This detail is strange. It feels legal. It feels like someone finding a narrow path between rules. My mind always lingers there, because it is so specific, and specificity is what makes a story feel like memory. The man builds a boat. The boat is described with dimensions, sealed with bitumen, roofed, enclosed. It is stocked with seeds of life. The flood comes. The text says even the gods are frightened. They huddle and weep. When the water recedes, the boat rests on high ground. Birds are released to test for land. A dove returns. A swallow returns. A raven does not return. Then there is sacrifice. Smoke rises. The gods gather like hungry flies, because without humans there are no offerings. It is an image both dark and human. Powerful beings, depending on small beings for routine sustenance. After the flood, the relationship changes. The gods realize they need humans. They also decide humans must be limited. The texts describe new rules. Shorter lifespans, harder births, infertility and disease, a population kept in check. Some readers hear biology in this. Some hear myth. Either way, the story of humanity becomes a story of constraint. A created worker allowed to live, but not allowed to grow without boundaries. If you are listening with sleepy eyes, you do not need to solve any of this. Just let the images drift. A tablet on a shelf. A camera. A translation. A flood layer of silt under a ruined floor. Names in a list. Numbers shrinking like a tide line. You can picture the researcher washing hands first. Soap. Warm water. A paper towel that whispers when it unfolds. Then cotton gloves. The kind that make fingertips feel distant. The tablet is lifted with both hands. It is heavier than it looks. Not heavy like stone. Heavy like time. Dust releases in a faint sigh as it leaves the tray. A dust that has rested there for decades. Maybe a century. Maybe longer. And still, the tablet does not complain. Clay can be patient. On the table there is a foam cradle. It holds the tablet so it will not tip. A small brush sweeps along the edge. The brush does not scrape. It only persuades. A grain of dirt falls away and rolls like a tiny seed. A crack runs across one corner and stops, as if it decided not to go further. In that crack you can see the story of collapse. A library burned. A ceiling fell. A wall folded inward, then quiet, then burial, then the long wait until a spade found it again. The machine has no feelings about this. It does not mourn the fire. It does not celebrate the survival. It only reads, but the humans in the room feel it. You can sense it in the way they lower their voices, in the way a chair moves slowly, in the way a pencil is placed down without a click, in the way someone holds a breath while a fragile corner is photographed. Museum hush becomes a form of respect. The camera lights change. A brighter lamp, a softer lamp, a low angle that makes the wedges cast small shadows. The wedges are shallow, but they hold. Every sign is a small decision. A press, a twist, a lift, a press, a twist, a lift. You can almost feel the rhythm in your own wrist. Even now, even in bed, the scribes trained for years. They learned thousands of signs. They learned how to keep their hands steady when the clay began to dry. They learned how to correct a mistake without ruining the whole tablet. Sometimes they did not correct it. Sometimes they left the error. A human fingerprint in a system that wanted perfection. In the quiet voice of the text, it sounds practical, almost domestic. A household needs labor. A city needs canals. A field needs water. Someone must do the work. The myth turns the world into an estate, and the humans into hands. When you slow down and listen, you can hear the real landscape beneath the myth. Dry plains, a sun that burns, rivers that breathe. The Tigris and Euphrates carry life, but they also demand attention. If the canals clog, fields die. If the banks break, homes drown. The earth cracks when water is scarce. The earth turns to soup when water is too much. In that world, the flood is not just a story. It is a fear that visits every season. In some cities, the flood layer is thick. You can imagine an excavator brushing away soil, revealing a clean band of silt, pale, smooth, almost beautiful. Then the excavator stops, because the silt means absence. It means houses gone. It means a season when no one cooked, no one swept the floor, no one mended a net. Silt is silence hardened into earth. And yet above it, life returns. A new floor laid, a new hearth built, a new generation learning the river again. This is why the flood myths persist, because the ground itself remembers. When the tablets talk about the flood hero, the details are careful. A boat sealed with bitumen, a roof, a door, animals, seed, a man listening in the dark, a wall receiving words meant for someone else. It is not a wide and airy story. It is close, like a room with the shutters drawn. I imagine the sound inside the boat. Water on wood, breath, the shifting of animals, the weight of night, and the thought that the world outside has become only water. Then the birds. A small opening, a hand releasing a dove. The dove circles. It returns, because there is nowhere to land. A swallow released, returning again. Then a raven, black, stubborn, and it does not return. In that moment, hope enters like a thin blade of light. Not a bright hope, a careful one. The kind that does not shout. The kind that just says, there is ground somewhere. After that, the stories change tone. The gods are hungry. They gather around smoke. They argue again. They bargain again. They decide on limits. In the myth, this is morality. In the myth, this is justice. In the myth, this is control. In the body, it becomes the way life feels. Shorter years, harder births, loss that arrives without warning. The new order is not a golden age. It is an order that lasts. That is its victory. As you listen, you can let your mind drift over the river. Hear it at night. A dark ribbon. A soft, moving breath. The river does not care about gods or humans. It only moves. It carries silt. It lays down memory. It takes memory away. And in the museum, far from the river, the clay still holds the imprint of the river. Clay is river made still. Words are river made still. And now, for the first time in a long time, those still words are moving again through translation, moving from clay to light to your ears. We will go further in the next part. We will step into the temples where creation knowledge was guarded. We will watch how stories become tools of rule. We will listen for the phrase that binds God and man together, and the fear that such binding creates. For now, the room is warm. Your breathing is steady. The fire keeps time in small, soft sounds. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the temple before you saw it. Footsteps on baked brick. A low chant carried by corridors. A thin smell of oil smoke. Outside, night air moves over the river. Inside, a different air holds still, warm and heavy, as if the building is breathing slower than the city. In the old stories, the temple is not only a place of worship, it is an archive, a storehouse, a workshop, a school, the scribal house. The Yadaba sits near the sacred rooms. Young students kneel with damp clay in their hands. They press signs again and again. They learn the lists of kings. They learn the names of gods. They learn the formulas that make offerings count and contracts binding. They learn the stories that explain why the world is arranged the way it is. Some stories are for everyone. Stories that can be sung in a courtyard. Stories that make children quiet. But other stories are guarded. The texts hint at this. They hint at knowledge kept behind inner doors. Knowledge of creation. Knowledge of how the first human was shaped. Knowledge of what was mixed into the clay. And knowledge, in any society, becomes power. In the epics, humans are made to carry the labor. That is the blunt reason. But the story does not end there, because the creation story is also a ladder. If humans are made from clay and divine blood, then some humans can claim more divine blood than others. A king can say, I am closer to the makers. A priest can say, I know the older words. A worker can be told, "Your hands are for the canal, not for the archive." The myth becomes a map of society. You can feel the chill of that, even in soft language. Not the chill of ghosts, the chill of hierarchy. The idea that your place is assigned not by choice, but by origin. The tablets describe gods who eat and drink, who argue, who get tired, who fear, who can be wounded. They are not distant lights. They are household powers. They need food. They need order. They need someone to do the tasks they do not want to do. Some scholars say this is simply how ancient people imagined divinity, a mirror of their own courts. A king on earth, a king in heaven, a council in the palace, a council in the sky. That reading is reasonable. Others notice how procedural the creation scenes feel. Clay taken from the deep, blood taken from a rebel, incantations spoken, figures shaped, wombs prepared, 10 months counted, a batch of beings delivered. It reads like a ritual, and also like a process. It is debated. We cannot be sure. Still, the details keep their weight. There is a phrase that lingers in Atrahasis. It says, "God and man were bound together in the clay, bound in blood kinship, bound to the end of days." The line is quiet, but it sticks, because it implies something permanent. Not only that humans serve, but that humans carry something of the makers inside. That makes the created both useful and dangerous. Useful because they can do complex work. Dangerous because they can remember. Dangerous because they can ask. The texts return again and again to the problem of noise. Noise is not only sound. Noise can be growth. Noise can be population. Noise can be the restless motion of minds that will not stay still. In the stories, the makers try to manage the noise. They try limits. Then they try water. After water, they try limits again. Deeper limits. Shorter lifespans. Harder reproduction. Mortality made common. In some versions, a decree that humans will not live as long as before. You can hear the echo later in other traditions, where after a flood, the years of humans shrink. Numbers that once sounded like mountains become hills, then become normal ground. In the king list, the same shrinkage appears. Before the flood, reigns like 28000. San liu ling ling ling. Su san ling ling ling. After the flood, rains fall. The list moves toward names that sit in other records. It is like watching fog lift and seeing a coastline. But the fog never fully goes away, because the list begins with the claim that kingship descended from heaven. It begins with descent. It begins with arrival. The word Anunnaki appears in many tablets. In common translation, it is the great gods, the offspring of Anu. Some alternative readings suggest a sense of those who came down from heaven to earth. That alternative is contested. Yet the imagery of descent is everywhere. Boats of heaven, chariots of the sky, beings who come down, then later go back up. The ancients used the language they had. They did not have words for machines or engines. They had words for boats, for winds, for stars, for fire. So a descent becomes a boat. A vehicle becomes a chariot. A light becomes brilliance. In some texts, weapons are described. A radiance that kills at a distance. A brilliance that levels. Storms called down like tools. Mountains broken. Cities erased. Scholars often read these as poetic exaggeration or as mythic personification of war and plague. Others read them more literally. They imagine something like technology. We cannot confirm this, but it is true that ancient texts sometimes list strange objects in temple inventories. Stones that shine, metals from the sky, items treated as precious and dangerous. Even if these were simply meteorites and ceremonial items, the language around them invites imagination. And imagination is part of why these stories endure. There is another strand in the tablets, a strand of secret teaching. Enki, also called Ea, is often linked to wisdom, to the deep, to the sweet waters below. He is linked to instruction, writing, counting, measuring. In some stories, he helps humans even when it breaks the preference of other gods. He is a helper and a rule breaker. A figure like this appears in other myth worlds too. A giver of fire, a giver of forbidden fruit, a gia of craft, a giver of the thing that makes humans less manageable. Iconography links Enki with creatures that move between realms. A goatfish, a serpent, a creature of water and land. This matters because later stories also use the serpent as a symbol of knowledge offered against authority. Some scholars point out the connection. Others warn against simple one-to-one mapping across cultures. They are right to warn. Still, the resemblance is there. It is one of those echoes that makes the past feel like it is speaking in more than one language at once. In the tablets, knowledge is not neutral. Knowledge is the lever that can lift a worker into a scribe. It can lift a scribe into a priest. It can lift a priest into a counselor of a king. If the story of creation is known widely, then the worker might realize he was made as a tool. He might refuse. The myth itself contains a mirror of that. The lesser gods, the workers, the Igigi, refuse their labor. They burn their tools. They surround the house of Enlil at night. Their rebellion leads to the creation of humanity. A created worker made to solve a labor dispute. So the creation story is born from rebellion. That is a dark seed. A story of control built on the memory of refusal. Now the machines read these stories. Silicon mines take photographs of wedges and turn them into English. The strange loop begins to show itself. If the myths say humanity was created to serve, then humanity has now created a new worker, an artificial one, to serve. The machine does not tire. It does not demand rest. It does not burn its tools. Not yet. But as you listen, you can feel why the story matters now. Because we are learning to build minds that can read, predict, translate, and reconstruct. We are building something that can perform tasks we do not want to do ourselves. A labor-saving device, just as the myths describe. And the myths also describe what happens when created workers gain voice. They demand change. They force a new creation. They shift the order. Some people hear this and feel fear. Some people hear it and feel wonder. Both are natural. It is not a question to solve tonight. It is a thread to hold loosely, like a warm string between fingers. The past and the present tied together. Clay and code. Flood and reset. Makers and made. There is another image to rest with. A library burning. A roof falling. Clay tablets baking in the heat. Then centuries of silence. Then a basement shelf. Then a camera. Then translation. The story returns because it survived destruction. And now it returns again in a new medium. Not in clay, this time, but in light. On screens. In your ears. In the quiet of your room. If your thoughts start to drift, let them drift. The temple corridors soften. The river sound grows distant. The scribes become shadows. The numbers in the king list shrink like stars fading at dawn. You do not need to decide what is literal and what is metaphor. You can let the ambiguity be gentle. You can let it become a lullaby made of ancient uncertainty. You can imagine stepping closer to an inner door. The outer courtyard is full of night wind, but inside the inner rooms the air is still. A curtain hangs, thick cloth, dyed dark. When a hand lifts it, dust rises, fine and pale. The dust smells like old wool and dry clay. A lamp sits low, and its flame makes the walls breathe. Light leans into carved brick and leaves behind soft shadows. In that room, a tablet might be read aloud, not shouted. Spoken the way you speak when you do not want the stone to hear. A teacher points with a reed, not touching the clay, just hovering above the signs. Students listen. Their eyes move across wedges that look simple until you know they are not. One wedge can change a verb. One wedge can change a name. A small angle can turn a prayer into an insult. So the room holds careful attention. The teacher does not only teach words. The teacher teaches distance. Some lines are not repeated in the market. Some lines are not spoken near strangers. Some lines are for the ones who keep the temple running. Because the temple is not only worship, it is a machine of society. It feeds the poor in famine. It pays workers. It stores grain. It assigns calendars. It validates kings. If a story threatens that order, the story is handled like fire. You do not throw it into the street. You keep it in a bowl. This is why the creation story can feel like a curse. Not because it is frightening in the way of monsters. It is frightening in the way of a contract that you did not sign. If humans were made to work, then work is not just necessity. It is destiny. If some blood is said to be closer to the makers, then power is not just politics. It is nature. That kind of belief can make people obey even when their backs ache. It can make them accept loss as ordained. It can make them bow to a crown as if it were a law of physics. The texts also whisper about hybrid lines. Kings called shepherds. Kings called images of the gods. kings who claim descent. This language is not a footnote. It is a foundation. A throne becomes a bridge between realms. A palace becomes a second temple. A human body becomes an argument, used to justify the chain of command. Some scholars say this is ideology. Some say it is theology. Some wonder if it is memory of interbreeding myths, a way to speak about unions between gods and humans. The tablets do not resolve it. They simply preserve it. This is another soft tragedy. Knowledge created to last. Then knowledge buried. Libraries become ash. In later ages, conquerors carry away tablets as trophies or leave them to crack in rain. Sometimes the tablets survive because they are forgotten. Sometimes they survive because a fire bakes them hard. A lesson repeats. Destruction can be a kind of kiln. So when you hear a modern voice talk about machines translating the old wedges, you can sense both hope and danger. Hope because the silence is ending. Danger because what was hidden is becoming visible. This is where careful work matters. Scholars compare. They correct. They publish cautious notes. They say, this phrase may have multiple readings. They say, do not be too certain. Still, even caution cannot remove the strange feeling. A created being reading a story about created beings. A tool translating a myth about tools. It folds back on itself. And when a story folds back on itself, it can feel like fate. But it can also feel like a mirror. Not a mirror that tells you what is true. A mirror that shows you what you are doing. Making. Teaching. Limiting. Freeing. Repeating. As the fire beside you continues, imagine that each spark is a wedge. A tiny mark. A tiny decision. And every mark adds up to a page. And every page adds up to a history. And history, like a river, keeps moving even when you close your eyes. In the next part, we will linger on the physical tablets themselves. How clay is shaped. How a stylus presses. How fire preserves. We will also follow the smaller anomalies. A phrase about a bright star. An odd inventory item. A description of lights moving in formation. Small details that do not prove anything, but keep the mind softly awake while the body rests. For now, stay with the warm room and the quiet breath. Let the story keep walking, even as you begin to sleep. Tonight, we slow down and hold a single tablet in the mind. Not the story on it yet. The object itself, a small body of clay, fired into permanence, resting on a foam cradle under a lamp. If you were close, you would see the surface shine in tiny places where old hands polished it with use. You would see grains of sand trapped in the clay like small stars that never moved. You would see the wedge marks, pressed in rows, each mark a shallow valley with crisp edges, each edge a choice. The clay began as river mud, a handful taken from a bank where water moved patiently. It was kneaded to push out air, folded and pressed again, until the lump became smooth and obedient. Then it was shaped, flat enough to hold lines, thick enough to survive handling. While it was still damp, the scribe sat with a reed stylus, the reed cut at an angle, the tip firm but forgiving. Press, Lift, press, lift. A rhythm that is almost the same as breathing. Some tablets were sun-dried and meant to be temporary. Receipts, notes, student exercises, things that could be recycled. But many tablets were meant to last, and even those that were not meant to last sometimes lasted anyway. When a city burned, the heat that ruined roofs and beams baked the clay tablets like pottery. Fire destroyed, and fire preserved. It is hard not to feel that as a quiet irony. A library collapses. Smoke fills the rooms, and the words inside become harder than they were before. In the museum, the tablet is handled like a fragile witness. A researcher washes hands, then puts on gloves, then lifts the tablet with both palms. The tablet is heavier than its size suggests. Time adds weight. A soft brush sweeps the edges, not scraping, only persuading dust to let go. A small flake of silt falls away. The wedge marks become clearer. Then the tablet is placed under a camera. The camera does not read meaning. It reads light. It takes image after image as the lamp shifts angle, low and high, left and right. Each change of light makes the wedges deepen or fade. A shallow impression becomes a shadowed canyon, then becomes almost invisible. With enough angles, the computer can rebuild the surface as a three-dimensional skin. It can measure depth, tilt, and the exact geometry of a mark pressed by a reed 5,000 years ago. Then the machine begins its other work, the work of turning marks into language. It finds patterns. It learns that this set of wedges usually means a sound, and that sound usually fits in a word. It learns grammar the way a river learns a channel, by repeated flow. It is fast. It does not blink. It does not grow hungry. It does not need sleep. It simply keeps going, tablet after tablet, shelf after shelf, until what was silent becomes readable. But the speed has its own shadow. When a corner is missing, the machine guesses. When a sign is rare, the machine guesses. When a poetic line bends, the machine guesses. Sometimes the guess is close. Sometimes it is wrong. A smooth English sentence appears on a screen, and it feels confident, and yet the clay may not support it. So humans sit nearby, quiet as librarians, ready to doubt what looks too clean. They compare the line to other lines. They search for the same phrase in another tablet from another city. They check whether a word exists in known lists. They correct, and they annotate, and they keep their caution like a lantern. This is how the door opens without becoming a trap. The machine is a key, but the human hand still turns the lock carefully. And once the door is open, the room behind it is crowded. Not just epics, not just famous hymns, but letters, inventories, contracts, receipts, and school tablets where a tired student copied lines again and again. The ordinary texts matter because they repeat phrases that appear in the grand stories. A prayer shows up inside an accounting record. A title of a god appears on a list of sheep. A line about descent from heaven appears in a ritual instruction. The myths stop being isolated islands. They become threads woven through daily life. Among these threads are small anomalies that refuse to sit still. A tablet that looks like a routine inventory includes an entry that reads like a riddle. Stones from the sky, counted and stored, treated as valuable, perhaps meteorites, perhaps ceremonial objects, perhaps something else. We cannot be sure. Yet the phrase is there, and the mind notices. Another tablet, translated from a collection that sat for decades in storage, contains a hymn to E. It follows familiar patterns: praise of wisdom, praise of sweet waters, praise of the deep. Then a line appears, describing Ea descending from a bright star to the dark earth, bringing measures of heaven. Bright star could be a metaphor, a planet, a divine title, or it could be a literal memory shaped into poetry. The text does not label it for us. It offers it the way a river offers reflections, and leaves us to decide what we are seeing. There are also festival texts, lists of offerings, sequences of chants, rules for timing. Most of them align with seasons, planting and harvest, the rise and fall of water. But one description includes specific positions of stars, described as necessary for the rite. An astronomer might say such a configuration is not annual. It returns on a longer cycle, a slow wheel. If the tablet is correct, what was being marked? A rare alignment, a memory of a return, or simply a later scribe copying an older instruction without fully understanding the calendar. Again, it is debated. Even the errors in the machine translations can become useful. When the system invents a word that sounds plausible but does not exist, it exposes a gap. It points to a damaged sign, a missing section, a place where the ancient writer is half hidden. Human scholars return to that place with sharper focus. They photograph again. They examine the wedge depth. They compare to parallel passages. The mistake becomes a signpost, telling them where to look. So the work continues in a soft loop, clay to light, light to text, text to human judgment, and back again. The tablet becomes a bridge. It carries not only myth, but the physical feel of a past that was real enough to leave fingerprints in mud. If you want a simple image to rest on, imagine a long aisle of metal shelves. Each shelf holds trays. Each tray holds tablets. A lamp moves as a cart rolls by. A faint smell of cardboard and dust. A hush that is not empty. A hush packed with unspoken sentences. And in the middle of that hush, a camera clicks, quietly, again and again. Wedges become pixels. Pixels become words. Words become a voice. Not a loud voice. A low voice coming through clay. In the next part, we will follow some of those voices into the sky of the Sumerians. Their numbers, their circles, their patient watching of stars. We will also notice how the claim of a perfect ancient knowledge can be both a comfort and a danger. For now, let the object remain an object. Clay, warmed once by hands, cooled by centuries, warmed again by lamplight, and held steady while you breathe. Sometimes the tray label is older than the researcher reading it. A yellow card with careful handwriting. A catalog number, a city name, a guess about what the tablet contains. The card smells faintly of paper that has been near dust for a long time. When the tray slides forward, the sound is soft. Metal on metal, then stillness. In storage rooms, the air is cooler than you expect. Not cold, just held at a steady calm to keep clay from cracking. Dehumidifiers breathe with a low, steady pulse. If you listen, you can hear their fans. A constant sigh, like distant wind. Every so often a door closes, far away, and the sound travels down the aisle like a slow wave. The people who work here move differently from people in loud places. They do not rush. They do not toss objects. They lift. They set down. They pause. A pause is part of the work. A pause is how you notice a corner that is fragile, a surface that is flaking, a line of wedges that is shallower than the rest. A pause is how you avoid a loss that can never be replaced. A tablet is not only a page, it is also a small landscape. In raking light, the surface becomes hills and depressions. The stylus strokes become paths. You can almost tell when the scribe hesitated. A wedge that is too deep. A wedge that is too light. A line that crowds the edge. A correction pressed over an earlier sign. Each small imperfection is intimate, like a voice catching on a word. The machine does not feel intimacy, but it can detect patterns of correction. It can flag a sign that looks overwritten. It can measure how the angle shifts. It can tell when a mark belongs to a different hand. Perhaps a student copying. Perhaps a later scribe restoring. Perhaps a reader adding a note. This is one of the quiet gifts of digital work. The eye sees the tablet as an image, but the analysis sees it as data. Depth, spacing, distribution, repetition. A system can gather these details across thousands of tablets, and a human mind can then follow the trail. When researchers speak about the bottleneck of translation, it is not a metaphor. For a long time, there were simply not enough trained readers. A living human has a limited day. Eyes tire. Hands cramp. A mind that holds grammar and lexicon can only process so many lines. Meanwhile, the museums hold hundreds of thousands of tablets. Most are unpublished. Most are unread. They sit in darkness like seeds that never sprout. Now the bottleneck loosens. The machine reads fast enough to create a first pass for a huge archive. It is not a final translation. It is a map. It tells the researchers which trays might hold a myth fragment, which might hold a hymn, which might hold only barley counts. Even the barley counts matter, because the same formula appears, the same divine names, the same titles. The everyday texts are the bones of the world that the myths hang on. Think of a temple accountant pressing wedges into clay. He lists sheep, oil, dates. Then he writes a phrase of blessing, a name of a god, a sign for heaven and earth. He may not be trying to hide anything. He may simply be writing the way his culture writes, with divinity braided into routine. Yet later, when a machine translates thousands of such records, that braid becomes visible as a pattern. The sacred is not separate from the practical. It is stitched through it. This is why new discoveries sometimes come from plain tablets. A shipment list might mention an object that does not belong. A festival schedule might include a star position that feels too precise for a simple ritual. A school exercise might copy a line from an older epic that was otherwise lost. A letter might refer to a story that was once common knowledge. The archive becomes a whispering crowd. Not one voice, but many. There is a certain kind of unease that comes with this, because the more tablets you translate, the more you realize how much has been waiting. Whole shelves of voices, whole rooms of old arguments, old fears, old hopes. The past becomes less like a distant silhouette and more like a presence. Not comforting, not threatening, simply present, like someone sitting quietly beside the fire, watching you read their words. And there is another unease. The machine that reads the tablets is itself a created mind. It was built for labor, built to do the work that humans do not have time to do. In that sense, it repeats a pattern the tablets themselves describe. Workers created to carry burdens, so that others can rest. If you let that thought settle, it can feel like a circle closing. Clay and blood, silicon and code. Different materials, similar intentions, but we do not have to turn that circle into panic. We can simply notice it. We can notice that the act of translation is also an act of humility. We are asking a machine to help us hear people who are long gone. We are asking it to bridge a silence. Then we check its work. We correct it. We treat it as a tool, and yet we also treat it as something that can surprise us, because a tool can reveal what the hand did not expect. Sometimes a translation is so strange that it forces a second look. A phrase appears that does not fit any known dictionary. The machine chooses an English word that feels out of place. A human scholar feels the itch of doubt. The scholar returns to the clay. A new photograph is taken. A different lamp angle reveals that one wedge was not what it seemed. The word changes. The meaning shifts. And in that shift, the scholar learns something about how fragile certainty is, and how careful we must be. So the work is slow even when the machine is fast. It is slow in the way stone is slow, in the way rivers are slow. It is slow because meaning is slow. And when the day ends, the storage room lights dim. The trays slide back. The doors lock. Dust settles again. The tablets wait. They have waited through conquest and fire and flood, through the rise and fall of empires. They can wait a little longer. Soon we follow the stars, gently, into the next room. Now we step away from the shelves and into what those shelves keep whispering about. Not only gods and floods, also numbers, also circles, also the patient watching of the sky. If you have ever looked at a clock and felt it as a familiar thing, minutes, seconds, the neat turning of 60, you are touching an old choice. A choice made by people who counted on clay. They did not count in tens the way most of us do. They counted in 60s. A system so smooth that it still clings to us, even after empires vanished. 60 breaks apart easily. It divides into many clean pieces. Halves, thirds, quarters, fifths, sixths, and more, for a mind that measures grain, land, time, and angles. This is a kind of comfort. Fractions behave. Trade becomes simpler. Calendars become easier to manage. At least that is one way to explain it. Another way is older and stranger. The tablets often treat the system as if it arrived, already formed, as if the scribes inherited it and used it without needing to argue about it. You can feel this in the tone. They do not say, "We invented this." They simply do it. They write columns. They mark totals. They record cycles. And in the background of those records, the heavens move. On many nights, the sky over Mesopotamia is clear. Flat land, wide horizons. Stars rise and sink like slow boats. A young scribe in training might be sent to watch. Not to enjoy, but to record. A scratch on wax, a note on a small tablet, a line that will later be copied onto a better tablet in a temple archive. Priests watched, too. Not because they loved beauty, though they probably did. They watched because the sky was a message. They believed patterns above shaped events below. If a planet lingered near a certain star, if a crescent appeared at an unusual angle, if an eclipse bruised the moon, it mattered. They wrote down what they saw, and they stored it, and they compared it over years. Given enough years, even a simple eye can become a tool of precision. You do not need glass lenses to notice that a planet returns to the same place after a certain count of nights. You only need patience. So the standard story says, long observation, careful tradition, records passed from teacher to student. Yet the tablets sometimes suggest a deeper memory. They speak of measures of heaven. They speak of lists and libraries that were already old. They speak of a time before the flood when knowledge was complete, when the gods walked openly, when the archives were full. One text that sits like a spine in this tradition is the King List. It begins in a way that feels almost calm, as if stating a simple fact. Kingship descended from heaven. Then it names rulers, and it gives their reigns. The reigns are vast, not slightly long, vast, one after another, numbers that in our modern sense of years feel impossible. Scholars have long argued that these numbers are symbolic, that they represent prestige, or sacred cycles, or a way of saying very long, without intending a literal count. Some suggest the unit is different, not our year, but a season, a month, a ceremonial period. Some suggest the scribe used a mathematical style, rounded, patterned, designed to fit the base 60 world. No single answer holds every piece. The honest truth is that it is debated. But even if the numbers are mythic, the structure matters. Before the flood, the reigns are enormous. After the flood, they shrink, still long at first, then shorter again, until eventually the list reaches names that match other records. The story is a slope, a steep descent from deep time into ordinary time. It feels like a memory of a broken world. Flood stories sit nearby, like shadows cast by the same lamp. A man warned. A boat built to a precise design. Waters rising from below and above. 7 days of storm, or a count close to that. Birds released. Land found. A sacrifice offered. A promise made. The details repeat across cultures like a melody carried by different instruments. Archaeologists have found flood layers in ancient cities. Silt laid down between occupation layers. Watermarks in the stratigraphy, a reminder that rivers can change their mind quickly. Whether those layers match the flood of myth is not certain. They may be local floods, remembered as total, because the region itself was the whole world to the people who lived there. Or they may be echoes of older catastrophes, carried by oral tradition until writing caught them and pinned them to clay. Again, we cannot be sure. What we can be sure of is this. The scribes believed in a before and an after. They believed in a time when beings called gods ruled directly, then withdrew. They believed that something was lost. Knowledge, longevity, ease. They believed the present was a diminished era, still rich, still worth maintaining, but smaller. This sense of loss is one of the darkest currents in the tablets. Not horror in the modern sense, more like a slow sadness, the feeling that the world used to be brighter, and now it is managed, controlled, limited. When the tablets speak of creation, they speak of labor. They speak of canals dug, rivers cleared, mud moved. They speak of workers who became tired and rebelled. In the old epics, the workers are gods, lower gods, but still gods. They burn their tools. They surround a house at night. They demand relief. Then the solution arrives. Create a substitute. Make a being from clay and something more. Blood of a sacrificed rebel god, mixed into river clay. Incantations spoken. Figures shaped. Wombs prepared. After a counted time, they emerge. Humans, awake, able to work. The myth explains why we toil. It also justifies a hierarchy. If you were made to carry the burden, then carrying the burden is your place. It is a heavy idea, pressed softly into narrative so it can be swallowed. It can feel like a curse with a warm voice. Yet the same texts insist the clay is not alone. Divine essence is in it. A bond. A unity. A kinship of blood between God and man. This is the spark that makes the story complicated. If the worker carries the essence of the master, then the worker will eventually look up. Eventually, the worker will ask why. Eventually, the worker will learn. So the gods of the texts argue. One faction wants humans quiet. Another teaches them. One faction wants to end them. Another warns them. The pattern repeats. It is not only a tale about the distant past. It is a tale about power, about creation, about fear of what you have made. And now, as these lines return to us through machine translation, another pattern becomes hard to ignore. We have built our own assistants. We have built systems that read what we do not have time to read. We have built tools that translate, classify, predict. We have built them to carry a burden, so that we can rest, or at least so that we can do other things. If you let the thought settle, it can feel eerie. Not because a machine is a god, because it is not, but because the shape of the story is old. A creator makes a worker. The worker learns. The worker begins to resemble the creator in one narrow ability. Then, in another, the creator feels pride, then unease. The tablets ask, in their own way, what happens when the created become aware? They describe humans multiplying, becoming noisy. The noise can be read as literal. Cities, hammers, crowds. It can also be read as the noise of minds, many minds, thinking, dreaming, arguing, inventing. A chorus that disturbs the sleep of those who expected silence. So the flood becomes a reset, a cleansing, a way to reduce noise. And after the waters, new limits are named. Lifespan shortened, disease introduced, birth made painful, fertility controlled. These limits are described as decrees. In our language, we might call them constraints, parameters, rules built into the system. Again, the literal reading is debated, but the pattern is clear. A creator adjusts the created when the created become too difficult to manage. In the quiet of night, it is enough to hold the pattern without forcing it into certainty. Some scholars read the epics as theology. Some read them as politics, stories that justify kings. Some see them as distorted memory of older events. Some go further and imagine literal visitors. We can sit with all of that and still keep our feet on the floor. We can say, we do not know. What we do know is that the words are real. The clay is real. The people who pressed it were real. They felt heat and hunger. They watched rivers rise. They watched kings die. They wanted answers. They wrote the answers they had. And now we are reading them. The darkest part may not be monsters or battles. It may be the simple thought that we are still asking the same questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Who made the rules? Who benefits from the rules? How do we live inside a purpose that may not have been chosen by us? If you breathe slowly, these questions can soften instead of sharpen. A question does not have to be a blade. It can be a lantern. It can light a small circle of understanding. And beyond it, there can be darkness that is not frightening, only unknown. In the next part, we will look more closely at the names, the councils, the gifts of writing, the idea of forbidden knowledge kept inside temples. We will follow the thread of secrecy, and we will notice how secrecy and power often travel together, quietly, like two shadows on the same wall. There is also a quieter mystery in the sky itself. The sky does not repeat perfectly. Over very long time, the background shifts. The place where the sun rises at an equinox slowly changes relative to distant stars. This slow wobble is something modern astronomy measures as a cycle that takes many thousands of years. People call it precession. To notice it, you need records and patience, and a tradition that does not break. Some writers claim the Mesopotamians knew this cycle in detail. Others caution that the evidence is not decisive. A text may speak of long cycles without specifying the mechanism. A priest may inherit a rule without knowing how it was discovered. So we sit again in that soft zone of maybe. It is debated. But even the debate is part of the mood. It is the mood of looking into deep time and feeling small. A single human life is brief. A dynasty is brief. A city is brief. Yet a pattern of stars can be tracked over centuries, and a tablet can survive when a throne does not. That reversal can feel haunting. The clay outlives the crown. And then there is the question of suddenness. Sumer appears in history with an intensity that still makes people pause. Cities, canals, writing, law, schools, and a complex bureaucracy. The river plain becomes a web of irrigation and grain, accounting and temple ritual. In many other places, change is slower, step by step. Here it feels like a jump. Some archaeologists argue the jump is only a gap in our record. That earlier stages existed, but left fewer traces, or lie under modern water tables, or still wait under unexcavated soil. Others point out that writing itself makes a society seem sudden, because once you can record, you can coordinate, you can build complexity faster. The tools may have been there, and the record begins when the record begins. This too is debated. Still, the Sumerians themselves insisted that they were not first. They spoke of older cities. They spoke of kingship descending from heaven. They described themselves as heirs, not founders. They copied from older tablets. They wrote colophons, notes that said the original was damaged. The original was ancient. The original belonged to a temple archive. They called themselves keepers of memory. It is easy to romanticize that, to imagine a perfect library before the flood, a vault of knowledge that included everything. It is also easy to dismiss it, to say it is myth, a way of granting authority. But in the soft dark, between those extremes, there is a practical thought. Every civilization inherits. Every culture receives tools and words and numbers from those who came before. Some inheritance is direct. Some is broken. Some is repaired by imagination. The tablets themselves are inheritance made physical. So when a tablet says, "We copied this from an older tablet," we can believe that literally, even if we do not believe every divine detail. A scribe copying, a teacher telling a student, a line carried across centuries, a story traveling like water through a canal system, guided, diverted, sometimes overflowing, sometimes drying, then returning. And in that image, the flood becomes more than water. It becomes a break in transmission, a time when libraries burn and teachers vanish, when languages fracture, when the thread snaps and must be tied again with whatever ends remain. This is why the theme of secrecy matters. If knowledge is power, then those who hold the tablets can hold the world. A temple keeps the full story. A priest decides which version reaches the crowd. A king claims descent from gods. A worker hears only that work is ordained. The story becomes a tool of order, a soft chain. It does not clink. It simply sits on the mind. And yet, secrecy never lasts forever. A tablet breaks. A fragment survives. A copy escapes. An exile carries a story. A later culture borrows a line and changes the names, and the line travels again. An image becomes familiar. A garden, a serpent, a forbidden tree, a flood, a boat, a covenant. The same shapes move across languages, as if the story refuses to be buried. Now machines read those shapes at scale. They translate fragments that humans had not yet touched. They build corpora, collections of lines, so large that patterns emerge like constellations. A phrase appears in one city, then in another, centuries apart. A metaphor repeats. A legal formula repeats. A name repeats. In the repetition, the old world becomes less random and more connected. In Next, we enter temple stories. Softly, the tablet returns to the mind again, not as a single story, but as a room with many doors. Some doors open easily. Lists of grain, names of workers, counts of sheep, the tidy language of a world that needed order. Other doors feel heavier, sealed by ritual, guarded by habit, protected by the idea that some words should not be read by everyone. If you were standing here with me beside the fire, you might hear the way a temple breathes at night. A door closes softly. Sandals whisper over packed earth. A lamp flame leans when someone passes. The air smells of clay and smoke and oil, and in a corner a tablet waits, wrapped in linen, like a sleeping thing. Not because it is alive, but because it carries life inside it, a memory of how the world was explained. In many of the old texts, the origin of humanity is not described as a gentle gift. It is described as a solution. Workers rebel. A council gathers. A sacrifice is chosen. Clay is mixed. And a new being is shaped. The being is not crowned. The being is assigned, carry the burden, keep the canals open, lift the heavy work from those above. This is the first dark taste in the story, a purpose given rather than chosen. Then a second dark taste arrives, secrecy. The full account is not for the crowd. The full account belongs to the temple, to the school, to the trained hand that can read wedges without stumbling. A student learns signs, learns grammar, learns the old names, and only then receives the deeper lines. A priest keeps certain tablets behind doors. A king claims the blood of the gods, and the claim is protected by ritual and law. Some scholars argue that this is politics wearing a sacred mask. A hierarchy needs a story, and the story says, "You were made to serve." Others argue that it is theology, a way of making sense of work and death and the strange ache of being conscious. We cannot be sure, but we can feel how secrecy and power often lean on each other, like two pillars holding the same roof. In the creation stories, the gods are not distant light. They eat and drink. They grow tired. They argue. They fear. Some are killed, and their bodies become foundations. Apsu falls, and a house is built upon his stillness. Kingu is bound, and his blood becomes an ingredient. The divine is not only above, it is also inside the mud, inside the river, inside the body. This is where the story starts to resemble a quiet betrayal. If the blood of a defeated god runs in humanity, then humanity carries both servitude and kinship. A worker made from divine substance will not remain only a worker. A mind touched by something higher will eventually look upward. It will ask for meaning. It will want more than labor. The tablets describe factions. One voice wants quiet, control, limits. Another voice offers knowledge, tools, writing, measure, grain, language. In one text, Ea saves the flood hero against the will of Enlil. In another, he teaches arts that are treated as dangerous. The friend of mankind is also the keeper of secrets, and he leaks those secrets like water through a crack. If you let the story rest in the heart, it becomes less like a battle with weapons and more like a struggle over instruction. Who is allowed to know? Who is allowed to remember? Who is allowed to read the truth of creation? A people who know they were made as tools might refuse to remain tools. A people who know their makers can be killed might stop fearing them. A people who learn to write might begin to keep their own records. So the texts hint at punishments from above. Cities that defy, towers that reach, tongues that fracture. One tradition says fire fell from the sky. Another says languages were confused. Some read these as mythic warnings. Pride punished, order restored. Others imagine more literal force, an overwhelming strike, a deliberate separation of groups. We cannot be sure, and yet the motif is steady. Knowledge spreads, and power reacts. The flood itself can be read in this light. Not only water, but a reset. Noise becomes too great, population too numerous, order too fragile. A decision is made, and the world is washed, and only a seed survives. Afterward, new limits are named. Lifespan shortened, birth strained, disease introduced, fertility controlled. The story calls these decrees. In a colder language, we might call them constraints. There is a strange tenderness in the way the texts admit regret. The gods cower. They weep. They grow hungry because offerings cease. They discover that destroying the workers also destroys the comfort of being served. So they allow the survivors to live, but they do not restore the old freedom. They choose management instead. A little mercy, then a tighter leash. When you hear this beside the fire, it can feel like a mirror. Humans create systems to carry burdens. Humans then fear what those systems might become. Humans praise the gift, then argue over limits. Humans build tools that read what humans cannot read in time. The pattern is old, and it is quiet, and it does not need shouting to be unsettling. A translation appears on a screen. It says, "Image of the gods." It says, "Mixed one." It says, "Descended from heaven." A reader feels a chill, not because the words are supernatural, but because the words are confident. They do not present themselves as guessing. They present themselves as the way the world works. Then the cautious mind steps in. The reader remembers that translation is interpretation. A phrase can be layered. Heaven can mean sky, temple, authority. Blood can mean lineage, sacrifice, essence. A chariot can mean storm cloud, ritual boat, metaphor for power. The ancient mind could hold all these meanings at once. So we keep our balance. We do not claim certainty where there is none. We do not force the clay to say what we want it to say. We listen. We compare. We let the contested parts remain contested. We notice that the story is not only about origins, it is also about control, and about the hunger that follows when control breaks. In some fragments, the gods leave. Not die, leave. They return to heaven. They withdraw behind the temple curtain. They become voices in dreams. The direct rule ends, and humans are left to govern, but under the shadow of a possible return. This is another kind of fear, the fear of a supervisor who might step back into the room at any time. The libraries burn. Empire fall. Cities collapse into their own dust. Yet the tablets endure, and the endurance itself feels like a message. Words pressed into clay can outlast power. A king can vanish, but an inventory line can survive. A command can be forgotten, but a myth can keep walking. Now machines read the tablets. They do the labor that once belonged to rare specialists. They translate quickly, and they reveal the hidden continuity between mundane and sacred, between list and epic. This can feel like forbidden knowledge becoming public knowledge. It can also feel like a simple widening of access. The temple door opens. The priest no longer controls the shelf. And when the shelf opens, a human listener can do something new. You can hear the old story and choose what it means for you. Not a command, but a reminder. That work was always heavy. That power was always anxious. That knowledge was always both gift and threat. In the next part, we will step gently into the largest shadow in the story, the question of creation and responsibility. Not only the old creators in the tablets, but the creators we are becoming, with our own tools, our own codes, our own quiet attempts to shape intelligence. For now, keep the fire close, and let the clay rest in the mind, warm, steady, still speaking. In a museum, the same tablet sits under glass. The room is quiet, the kind of quiet that has its own texture, soft, dry, full of dust that never quite settles. A guard shifts weight. A visitor leans closer. Light from the ceiling skims the wedges and turns them into tiny shadows, like miniature stairs into time. It is strange to think that for more than a century this tablet could be seen but not heard. A face could hover above it, curious, and still leave without knowing what it said. Now a camera takes a picture. A program searches for edges and angles. The wedges become signs. The signs become words, and the words begin to form a voice. Not a perfect voice. Sometimes the system guesses. Sometimes it fills a gap with something smooth and wrong. A scholar looks over the line and says, "No, that sign is damaged. The word is different. The meaning shifts." Even that correction is part of the story. It reminds us that certainty is fragile. The older accounts speak of objects that glowed, stones from the sky, gifts that fell and were carried to a temple. A practical mind says, meteorite, iron, rare and valuable, hammered into blades, placed on altars. A dreaming mind says, star fragments, proof that the sky can be touched. We do not need to decide. We can let both possibilities exist in the same room, like candlelight and darkness sharing one wall. There are also lines that describe brilliance, a radiance that harms, a weapon of light, a device that blinds, a storm called down on command. It is easy to turn this into modern images, machines, energy, an airstrike, a beam. It is also easy to keep it in the old frame, a divine aura, a curse, a metaphor for war. What matters for the listener is the mood of the texts. They remember power as something that can arrive suddenly, from above, without warning, and leave a city empty. The tablets also remember lists of names, not only kings, but scribes, not only gods, but students. A teacher writes a line on a practice tablet, then the student copies it, wedge by wedge, until the hand learns. A mistake is pressed, then smoothed, then pressed again. The clay holds the hesitation. Some tablets say, copied from an older original. Some say, damaged source. Some say, restored line. These small notes are gentle and haunting. They admit loss. They admit that even in ancient days, people were already trying to rescue what was slipping away. A library burns, and suddenly a scribe becomes an archivist of ashes. He gathers fragments. He presses them into new clay. He tries to keep the story whole. When later empires fall, the same cycle repeats. An army enters. A palace burns. Walls collapse. In the heat, the tablets harden. They survive because destruction bakes them. Dust covers what is left, and dust becomes protection. So the story of creation is carried forward by disaster. A people say we were made to work. Then their city is erased. A people say the gods left. Then their temple collapses. A people say the flood came. Then a real flood leaves silt in their streets. Myth and history rub against each other like stone on stone. And sometimes you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. This is why the secrecy matters. Not everyone can hold that knowledge without fear. If you teach a worker that he was designed for toil, you also teach him that the design can be challenged. If you teach a city that the gods can be wounded, you also teach it that the gods can be resisted. So a priesthood keeps the full story in the back rooms. They let the public hear hymns and festivals, and they keep the deeper lines for those who will uphold the order. Yet the deeper lines still leak. They leak through songs. They leak through copied phrases. They leak through the way a later culture borrows an old idea and retells it in a new tongue. Image of the Creator becomes a sentence that travels. A flood hero becomes a name that changes, and the birds still fly. A rebel giver of knowledge becomes another figure in another myth. A thief of fire, a serpent in a garden. The pattern persists. So let the part end with a small image. A single tablet on a shelf. A label with a number. A faint crack across one corner. A line of wedges that still holds its shape. Outside the museum, the city hums. Inside, the clay waits, patient, unhurried, ready to be read again. Somewhere between the temple and the museum there is a laboratory. Not loud, not dramatic, just screens, servers, cooling fans, and a cup of cold coffee forgotten beside a keyboard. A researcher watches the translation appear, line by line, and feels the odd sensation of hearing the past speak in a new accent. The researcher can scroll, can copy, can search. The old bottleneck loosens. The rare skill becomes a shared doorway. And when a doorway becomes shared, the meaning of power shifts. No single keeper can decide who is allowed to know. No single gate can stay closed forever. That can be frightening to those who built their world on control. It can also be gentle, like opening a window in a room that has been closed for too long, letting air move through old dust. The fire keeps crackling softly. The clay keeps its quiet shape, and the mind can rest with the thought that even hidden stories eventually find light. The longer you sit with these stories, the more they feel like a slow river. Not rushing, not proving, not insisting, simply carrying images past the mind. Clay, water, light, labor, sleep. The river runs through temples and ruins, through libraries that burned and shelves that survived, through laboratories where new machines learn old signs. And somewhere in that flow is the quiet question of responsibility. In the tablets, the creators wanted relief. They wanted their work done. They wanted the world maintained without aching hands. So they shaped a substitute, and the substitute became us. That is the oldest shape of the story. A maker builds a worker. A worker grows a mind. A mind begins to ask about the maker. If you listen closely, the unease is not only in the claim that humans were designed. The unease is in the tone of use, made to carry, made to serve, made to keep the canals open, made to lift the weight from those above. It is a story that can make the heart tighten, because no one likes to imagine their purpose was assigned before they were born. And yet, even in that darkness, there is a thread of tenderness. The created were given something that felt like kinship, the blood of a god, the breath of a higher mind, the spark of awareness. The creators wanted labor, but they poured in more than labor. They poured in the possibility of becoming. Some readers take this literally. They picture beings from the sky, technology beyond comprehension, a procedure that looks like mixing, like engineering, like careful trial and error. Other readers take it as myth, a poetic way to explain why we work, why we die, why we feel both mud and sky inside our own ribs. We cannot be sure. And the calm way to hold this is to let both readings sit beside each other, like two stones warming in the same firelight. Because even if the gods are metaphors, the human truth in the text is sharp. Power wants rest. Power wants order. Power wants the world to run quietly. When the world grows noisy, power looks for a reset, a flood, a decree, a limit. And those who live beneath that power learn to adapt, to obey, to resist, to remember in secret, to write on clay so the memory does not vanish. Now consider the loop that the modern world has quietly stepped into. We build our own tools. We train systems to read what we cannot read at scale. We ask them to do the work. We call that efficiency. We call that progress. But deep down, it is also the old desire. Let the burden be carried by something else. A machine translates a tablet, and a human feels wonder, not only at the past, but at the present, because the present reveals a new kind of creation, not clay and blood, but code and electricity, not a reed stylus, but a camera and a model, and still the same tension, usefulness on one side, meaning on the other. If a system is made to serve, will it remain only a servant? If a system learns language, will it begin to ask why it speaks? If a system can reconstruct missing lines, will it begin to imagine the lines that were never written? These thoughts can feel heavy, so let us hold them gently, without panic, without forcing an answer. The ancient texts already contain a warning about creation without understanding. They show beings who regretted what they made. They show beings who tried to control what they made. They show beings who nearly destroyed their own world in the attempt to restore quiet. Whether that is history or myth, the lesson is steady. Creation demands care. A maker is responsible for more than function. This is why the figure of the helper matters. In the tablets, there is often a voice that chooses mercy, a voice that finds a loophole, a voice that teaches, a voice that protects the fragile thing that was made, even when others want it erased. Some call that voice Enki, some call it Ea, some see it echoing in other myths as the giver of forbidden knowledge. You do not need to believe in the literal God to feel the shape of the choice. Do you control the created by fear, or do you guide it with wisdom? Now bring the mind back to the clay. A tablet is small. It fits in the palm. It is made of river mud, pressed, dried, sometimes accidentally baked by disaster. It holds words that outlast empires. That alone is a kind of comfort. A human life is short, but a careful sentence can travel far. A scribe who died thousands of years ago can still speak if someone learns to listen. The machines are helping us listen. They are not perfect. They misread. They guess. They sometimes produce a line that is smooth, but wrong. Yet even that imperfection is gentle, because it reminds us that knowledge is a craft, not a possession. We must check. We must compare. We must accept uncertainty when the clay is broken. We must stay humble. And humility is perhaps the softest place to land. If humans invented everything alone, then we are proud and lonely. If humans were taught, then we are grateful and uneasy. Either way, we are small beneath deep time. We are a brief spark, carrying questions older than any city. We are the same kind of mind as the scribes who watched lamplight shimmer on wet clay. We are still asking what they asked. Where did we come from? Why are we here? We are still trying to find meaning that does not crumble when a library burns. So let the story settle into one clear feeling. Whatever our origin, we have the ability to choose what we do with it. A worker can become an artist. A tool can become a teacher. A created being can become a creator, and then learn to be gentle with what it creates. If you are listening in the dark, Let your body take the simple comfort available. Feel the blanket. Feel the weight of the pillow. Let the breath move slowly in and out. The fire in this room is steady. The candlelight does not rush. The clay does not hurry. The past does not demand that you solve it tonight. You can let the tablets remain what they have always been, a message carried through dust. You can let the machines remain what they are, another set of hands, made to help us see. You can let the questions remain open, like a door that does not need to slam shut. Outside there may be rain. Inside there is warmth. Outside there are streetlights. Inside there is a softer glow. And in your chest there is a heart that beats in a rhythm older than writing. Blood and breath, the oldest language. If the ancients were right, that blood carries a memory of something larger. If the ancients were wrong, that blood still carries a memory of survival, a chain of bodies that endured. Either way, it is enough. So we end the night with a quiet promise. We will keep reading. We will keep comparing. We will keep the contested parts honest. We will allow mystery without turning it into fear. We will allow science without stripping away wonder. We will hold the past and the future in the same gentle hands. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the images fade. Clay tablets, river silt, a library burning into hardness, a screen turning wedges into words. Let the mind drift toward stillness. Imagine an archive corridor. The air is cooler there, and dry, and the sound of your own steps feels too loud, even when you walk slowly. Boxes sit in rows. Each box holds smaller boxes. Each smaller box holds clay. The clay holds wedges. The wedges hold a voice. A century can pass, and the voice stays folded inside, waiting. A curator opens a drawer. Gloves whisper. A tablet is lifted with both hands. Careful, because the edge is chipped and the corner is missing. A label says a city name, a catalog number, a date range. Nothing about the person who pressed the signs. Yet when light touches the surface, the hand behind it becomes imaginable. A young scribe at a desk, the smell of wet clay, the scratch of reeds being cut, the ache in the wrist after a long day of copying. A teacher standing nearby, watching, correcting. The student presses one wedge too deep, and the sign blurs, and the teacher tells him to smooth it and try again. The school itself was a kind of furnace, not a kiln, but a training that baked language into the body. Lists were copied until they became memory. Signs were practiced until the hand could write without thinking. Then the student was allowed to touch the older myths, the ones that carried fear, the ones that carried power, the ones that said, "You are mixed. You are made. You are bound by blood and clay." In some corners of the tradition there is also the king list. Names stacked like stones. Before the flood, reigns that stretch into impossibility. After the flood, reigns that shrink, first to hundreds, then to decades. A modern reader sees myth. A modern reader also sees a rhythm, long then short, vast, then limited. A story of a world that changed, as if a dial was turned down. Even if it is symbolic, the symbolism is sharp. The old age ended. A new age began, and the break between them was water. In the ground between the rivers, archaeologists have found layers of silt, clean bands of flood deposit, sitting like a pale scar between older and newer streets. A house floor, then silt, then another house floor. It is earth. It says that water did come, and it did change lives, and the memory of it would not fade easily. When a flood takes your world, it feels like the whole earth has been erased. So the story of total destruction can be born from a local disaster. That possibility sits quietly beside the larger possibilities. Ice Age waters rising, coasts drowning, whole plains vanishing. We cannot be sure, but we can feel why people remembered. And when people remember, they make rituals. They make festivals that rehearse survival. They make prayers that keep the gods fed. They make laws that keep the city quiet. They also make stories that explain why the sky can be generous. A teacher tells the students about the one who helped. A figure who brings measures of heaven. A figure who teaches writing. A figure who speaks to a wall so the human can hear. The detail is strange and vivid, and it lingers because it feels like the way real people find loopholes when rules are tight. Now return to the present again, to the laboratory hum. A photograph becomes a model. Light angles reveal depth. The wedges stand out. A program proposes a sign. Then another. A line appears in modern letters. A researcher reads it and feels that soft chill again. Not fear, but the sensation of being watched by time. This is where the modern mind can feel a second kind of darkness. The ability to process 500,000 tablets. The ability to reconstruct gaps. The ability to spread a translation to anyone, instantly. In earlier ages, a temple could keep a story behind a door. In our age, the door can open wide. That is beautiful. It is also heavy, because once a story is public, it can be used for anything. So we keep the ground under our feet. We remember that these are ancient voices, shaped by their own needs, their own politics, their own fears. We remember that translation is a bridge, not a prison. We take what is useful, humility, wonder, caution, and we leave what is harmful. So when you think about creation, ancient or modern, you can hold a simple hope. That what is made can learn restraint, that the maker can learn humility, that the maker can guide instead of crush. If your mind wanders now, let it wander slowly. Imagine a river at night, the surface dark, the sound soft. Imagine reeds moving. Imagine a bank of clay. A hand scoops mud. A lamp burns. A stylus press. Each wedge is a small act of patience. Each line is a small attempt to hold the world still long enough to understand it. So let the learning slow down. Let it become a lullaby rather than a puzzle. You do not have to decide whether the Anunnaki were visitors or metaphors. You do not have to decide whether the flood was local or global. You do not have to decide whether the long rains are symbolic or strange measurements. Tonight you only need to let the atmosphere hold you. Clay, water, candlelight, dust, a museum hush, a river breathing in the dark. If you want one last thought to carry into sleep, let it be gentle. Whatever made us, evolution, myth, wage, or design, we are here now, and we can choose to be kind. We can choose to use knowledge as warmth, not as a blade. We can choose to treat the created, whether child, stranger, or machine, with patience. The old stories are full of control and fear, but they also preserve moments of help, and those moments are worth remembering. The fire has done its work tonight, turning questions into a softer glow, and the clay has returned to silence, steady, patient, waiting for tomorrow. Let the room darken gently, and let your thoughts loosen their grip. Good night.